everybody just supports, and the amount of kindness and love and respect that's shown year after year after year is just, to me, something that bakers are better that than almost anybody. Just putting aside whatever little craziness there is and focusing on the craft of baking is really just one of the greatest things that's ever happened in my career. Is got picked on the 96 team. I had Glenn Mitchell on my team and Jeffrey Hamelman, so I wasn't too bad of a shake at the time. It was an incredible experience. So I grew up in the East Bay eating Steve's bread at Shape and Ease before I even thought about being a baker. The beginning of my career has always been about giving back, because that's how I was shown, from the very beginning, just kindness from day one. Yeah.
Welcome back to Craft Baking Edge podcast. I'm your host, Michael Egebrecht. Today, I'm truly honored to be joined by one of the true legends in American artisan baking, Craig Ponsford. Craig, thank you so much for joining the program today. It's very kind of you to take time out of your day and be here with us. So you just got back from a trip. Where were you traveling?
My wife and I went to an area south of Puerto Vallarta called Yulapa. It was one of the first trips we've ever taken that had nothing to do with bakery. And it was pretty nice. It was pretty nice, actually, because I get opportunities to go places, for teaching or whatever, or judging or this or that. And so often we go and make a trip out of those kind of events, and add another few days at the end or the beginning of that. So that's often how our trips get manifested.
I can imagine. Yeah, some of my best trips have always been attached to some type of baking travel. I remember having dinner with you in 2005 in Paris at the Bread Bakers Guild event, and I got to sit next to you. And is that the time? Do you think it was 2005? You weren't coaching that, were you?
Yeah, that was the Williams team, William and Jory and Jeff Yankelo, and Tim Foley was the coach of that team, and I was the manager of the team, something like that. Whatever. Yeah. I can't remember what our titles were.
But one thing I don't know about you is the beginning of your career. So I worked with Greg Mistel in Portland at Delphina's Bakery and knew a little bit about you through him. And of course, before I really ever met you, read about you in the bread lines when your story was published after you won your category in the Coupe de Monde and stuff like that. But I don't know how you even got into bread baking.
Well, I wasn't a very good student in school. The school system wasn't really designed for my kind of way of being. And so I started working in kitchens as soon as I could. It was a rewarding, an area that I actually was told that I was doing something good. So I started working in kitchens pretty young. I don't really remember when, but as soon as they would let me in. So I think that was probably 15 years old or something, 14 years old. I tried to do college, but I loved college, but really loved my professors and all that, and seemed that they liked me, but I had a really hard time passing any classes. So being dyslexic and hyperactive and all that. So I ended up going to Alaska. One of my roommates lived up there. And so I went up there one summer to work in the fishing business, and I got hook, line, and sinker, so to speak. Fell in love with the fishing business, and ended up being up there for a couple of years up in the Dutch Harbor area is kind of where I ended up kind of having a career. And the oil spill took place, the big Valdez oil spill. Oh, yeah. And that changed Alaska overnight, literally. And I was home. I would sign 6-month contracts kind of thing, and then go home for a month and then go back. And I was home, had just gone home when that happened. And the company I worked for, which was a pretty large company, went bankrupt almost immediately. These fishing businesses are brutal, just more brutal than the baking business, I'm guessing. And so I was home and had a pocket full of money and was going through it rather quickly. I was having a good time. And decided culinary school was a good way for me to spend that money. So I went to my grandparents, my two grandmothers, and between the three of us, we paid for my culinary school. And while I was going to culinary school, I got a job, and I went to school to be a chef. While I went to culinary school, I worked at a bakery because I was paying for my way and rent and board and all that. So I was able to work a graveyard shift while so I do 8 hours of school, 8 hours of baking, and I fell in love with the parallelness to commercial fishing to bread baking is quite remarkable, actually, in regards to instead of loading ovens, we're loading freezers. A salmon or a cod or whatever is very much like a loaf of bread.
Sure.
So in regards to how I organized my bakery, everything I did from after fishing was because of fishing. Because they're so those catcher processors, which is what I mostly worked on. Their production was, we do 1 million pounds of product every 24 hours. So
Oh.
you really learn how to rock and roll. So that's where I learned my production skill sets, really. And my way of thinking about a bakery was, like being on a boat. You When you're out at sea in Alaska, you're not pulling into the hardware store. You have the entire hardware store on the boat,
Right.
and the mechanics and the electricians and the plumbers and whatever. So I always kind of thought of my bakeries the same way, as that we fixed everything ourselves. Tried
Yeah.
to anyway before we called the expensive help. And my cheapskate, in other words.
That reminds me, you had met Ben Davis up there from Grand Central. He was doing that for a bit, right?
Yeah, Ben Davis was my idol. Like, I mean, he was like the Beatles for me. He was really talented guitarist, and we loved his music. But he was my boss, and well before I had any idea about baking, either one of us. So after I had won, I think there was some award in Chicago, the World Bread Award or something, and I had won that before the Coupe de Monde thing. I think, if I remember right. Anyway, he calls me and says, "Are you the same Craig Ponsford?" And I couldn't believe it. And he turned out to be. Yeah, I mean, it was his birthday just a couple days ago, so I just had talked to him a couple days ago. I love that man.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like,
Uh,
mm,
yeah, for those of you who don't know, Ben Davis is the founder of Grand Central Bakery. I guess his mother was, his family was, but really he's kind of the him and his sister and his family are the driving force behind building Grand Central into what it is today. Um, Quite amazing that both of you like fished together and probably didn't have a clue that you were going to end up in the baking industry, and then you both ended up being having a pretty respectable role in the artisan bread movement.
without a doubt, it's so cool. And also, I was really lucky. He actually hired me many times to help consult with their, products also. So not only, just a blessing, so many blessings, but also actually him employing me a few times, significant employment. It was really nice.
Well, that's pretty cool. That I didn't know that how you got started, and so it's nice to hear. The '90s was kind of really the decade where everything took off for artisan baking in America. You probably saw it in California a bit in the '80s too, with Acme possibly and stuff. But how is that different than today? It's amazing, 35 years ago to 1990, 36 years ago. What a lot that has changed. It's such a mainstream industry now.
Yeah, it is super fascinating. And, I guess 35 years seems like in one way a long time, and another way, as we're getting older, time flies. So it seems like it was just a
No
minute
kidding.
ago. But yeah, I mean, you were there too, man. We were all along this journey, and Portland was such a almost could say more exciting than the Bay Area when those bread festivals we had up there, and just a lot of energy around bread. The Bay Area was similar. We're just very lucky to have Acme, Semi Freddy's, Grace Baking, Metropolis, the Bread Garden. There was some, Chez Panisse where Steve got started from Acme. I grew up in the East Bay eating Steve's bread at Chez Panisse before I even thought about being a baker, and loving his bread. And, Chez Panisse, of course, when you talk about it now, you think about, dollars a little bit, but like, oh, that's an expensive place. But when Chez Panisse opened, it was just like a quiche and salad place. It was pretty humble French kind of simple deliciousness, and Steve was part of that. So I remember his bread was just like, it's still today. It's called upstairs bread, and we still go to Chez Panisse, not very often, but once or twice a year. And I still just that bread. I have to be really careful not to have too much of it served. I won't have room to eat anything else because I love it so much. Still incredible. Still that same bread.
So I was a few years behind you. I moved across country and opened a bakery in the Columbia Gorge in basically where Ben lives now. And he lives in the Gorge, but I opened in a little town called Bingen, which is next to White Salmon. And I was 21 years old, opened a bakery, and I thought I was going to bake what I had learned baking growing up at my parents' bakery. And I quickly learned that, Grand Central was already open in Portland. And I remember going there and just being like, what is this crazy, awesome bread I'm eating? I have to figure out how to make this. But I had an old revolving tray oven and just trying to make things work with a spray bottle. And I would hose down the inside of the oven, trying to get, oven spring. And it was
Mm.
looking back, I found some pictures of some of my bread back when I was first learning how to figure it all out. And it's shameful. It's absolutely shameful.
Yeah, my ego has definitely been out of control at times, and I've definitely have been told and reminded that the first few years were definitely rough. I didn't believe it at the time, I don't think, but but Michael, you had the generational background. I didn't realize that your dad or your parents. I didn't know that your mom was in the baking business for one thing. Am I understanding that accurately?
Yeah, I'm a multi generational baker. My grandfather, many generations even before that. I think in my grandfather's era, it was a lot of bread. My dad's bakery
Right,
was mostly pastry, American bakery, I mean, we did make Danish rolls but American Danish rolls and pies and cakes, and my mom would stay late, on Saturday nights decorating wedding cakes or Friday nights, I guess, for a Saturday wedding, and so my whole
right.
existence, I think what helped me in that was the energy of a bakery, even though I didn't go on to make the same products as my parents, but the energy and the early morning hours and also the entrepreneurial independence of being a bakery owner was passed on to me definitely. It's kinda in my blood.
Yeah, for sure. I have a memory of definitely meeting your father. It seems like, is it possible that I met your grandfather also back in the day?
I don't think my grandfather, but certainly my dad. I
Yeah,
can't
I
remember where that
remember
was. Was it possibly in Orlando in 2007,
it's
at that baking show?
a trade show in Florida. Yeah, that would make sense. I remember being real excited about seeing him. Yeah, you can just, when you meet a baker, you know a baker, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about something that you spend a lot of time in is the baking competitions. And I mean, ultimately, that's where I first saw your name was again in the bread lines in the 90s when you disclosed your ciabatta recipe. And I remember the picture of you cutting, I think it was probably you, but cutting and you were couching the ciabatta. And I tried to make that several times. And so the baking competitions have been a big part of your early and middle career. I don't know if how much you're still involved now, but um, that's kind of you got involved in that early.
Yeah, I mean, I was a hyper, as I mentioned, I was hyperactive, and so sports were always kind of another area that I can find some reward in. Uh, and so when I found out in early in my career, actually, Glenn Mitchell, who was my teammate, but also the owner of Grace Baking, um, had told me. I told him I was opening a bakery about a year before. I was working for him. He's the bakery I worked for when I was in culinary school, and he had told me about the trade show in Paris that was called. You might remember. I can't remember now.
Europan.
Europan, thank you. So Europan, he told me about Europan. He's like, you have to go, and literally, I went like I opened in July, and it's usually in January or February. So I had gone before I opened, and this was '92. And so the first World Cup was in '92, and I happened to just stumble. I mean, Glenn told me to go to this trade show, and I don't. Did you go to Europan? Did you
I've
go to
been there
any of
many
those?
times, but not in '92.
Yeah, so the Europans were incredible, right? I mean, the original, the early days, they were so huge and so focused on artisan that they were mind blowing for me. Literally, my mind was popping because there was incredible bakers, like really well known bakers, all over the trade show baking in bakeries. And in the United States, we were not doing that at the time. We were, pulling stuff out of pre-made containers and icing cakes as quickly as we could or whatever. So
Right.
anyway, Eric Kaiser was part of the first World Cup, and I was just a kid, I don't know, I was 23 or whatever, four, and I was completely infatuated with watching this competition. I was there from sunrise to sunset, literally like the biggest nerd that there ever was. And after 48 hours of that, um, Eric took me under his wing and even like spent a few days with me, taking him to the school he taught at and showed me his bakery. And I was hooked. I was like, I need to get involved in this competition. So um, then 94 rolled around. My bakery opened in 92. And as you know, when you open a bakery, you're not really thinking about much other than working every day of your life for 16 hours a day or whatever it was at the time. And I went back to the World Cup, whatever it must have been, 94. Yeah, 2 years later. And Greg Mistel was in the 94 one with Rick Kirkby from Acme Bakery and Mary Ellen Hatch or something, who left the baking business pretty quickly thereafter. So haven't seen her forever. But so I watched them compete, and I met Tom McMahon, who started the Bread Bakers Guild, and I just was glued to the competition. And, I fell in love with Greg Mistel at that time. And Rick Kirkby from Acme was just a great baker. And I was like glue all over that scene, and learned, kind of learned that I needed to be involved in the Bread Bakers Guild and volunteer and hang around this Mistel guy to get involved, and got picked on the '96 team. And I had Glenn Mitchell on my team and Jeffrey Hamelman, so I wasn't too bad of a shake at the time. And it was an incredible experience. And, once again, not having been very successful in a lot of things up to that point, it actually shocked my entire family. Just about, dropped, fainted when when they announced that I had won that competition. Because so, but
Yeah.
I was focused. I had DDA Rosada. I was literally DDA's first student in the United States. Uh, Tom McMahon had brought DDA over to do some testing of flour for Bay State milling, and made a lab in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a little baking lab that supported the team's practices, and DDA was there, and it was a miracle, absolute miracle. So, in part, to answer your question about how things have changed in the business, is there was not the information that DDA was teaching us in books that were written in English. And the Bread Bakers Guild mission that Tom McMahon really made like very clear at the time was education. You know, basically that was it. That you could just write a one word mission statement in a way, and Team USA was a vehicle in his mind to educate the American bakers because he really felt like we were all over the board, and he was very accurate. The fact that we all think we can be bakers without going to school and get taught by whoever's at the bench at that particular bakery, and whoever and that person feels very a lot of a I know what I'm doing, and but they don't really know what they're doing. uh, so that was the revolution that happened in the 90s was, for me, my observation, my point of view is Team USA was a vehicle that Tom McMahon created and really lobbied for us to even be considered to be in that competition, because American baking wasn't really considered like something to be super proud of as far as the Europeans were concerned. You know, they were kind of like snobby about it. And DDA and the process of being in the World Cup made us kind of have to grow up and learn how to bake on an international level, which meant, like using the metric system
Right.
and understanding baker's math and thinking internationally about baking, which, as you know, Michael, teaching in other countries is often easier than it is in our own country, just because they've went to school. So they have a language that we all speak internationally, but in our own country, it's still to this day I find it sometimes challenging because of all the crazy words and books that are written that aren't necessarily very accurate. And so I personally, if we don't mind talking about the team just a minute longer, I have been involved. I've been very lucky to I got to be the president of the jury in the World Cup in 2024, I guess it was. Um, and that's kind of the last. That was kind of the last position I hadn't done. I've been lucky enough to hold every position there, almost any position that can be held in regards to the World Cup, as manager or coach or president of the jury. I got to be on the jury a couple times. So that was a really big deal for me, and also a big reminder of how what an impact American bakers have made on the world stage. When I look at the products that are being made, just that every country is making now, kind of as the line in the sand, are things that like Peter Ewan or Mike Sikowski or people brought to the table first. And I'm very, very proud of the really hard work and dedication that many, many people made over the years. That I really, you know, my point of view, of course, but I really feel changed the skill level in our country to be, some of the top bakers in the world, many of them. And really, the vision of the Bread Bakers Guild was not only to use this vehicle of the people, but to use those people as our educators. So many of our educators around the country are past team members. And once you go through the process of being a team member, you're a master baker if you win that competition or not. You learn so many great skill sets. And so
Yeah.
I was reminded that, and Michael, you know this, that the greatest thing about, I think the greatest thing about being a baker is just how cool bakers are everywhere in the world. Like, no matter where you and I've worked together, whoever is in the room, whatever language they speak, um, we all speak the same language without having the same word, having the same language. Um, I love the diplomacy of the World Cup. Especially the way the world is these days, and how everything's so divided, and we're all so much the same. The World Cup shows that more than anything. There's people from all over the world with all kinds of different religions, all kinds of different politics, extreme in a way, like things you're just like, almost worried about because you have no idea what it means to be whatever people are coming from other countries and different sexes, female, male, whatever, and everybody just supports and the amount of kindness and love and respect that's shown in the World Cup year after year after year is just to me something that bakers are better that than almost anybody. Just putting aside whatever little craziness there is and focusing on the craft of baking is really just one of the greatest things that's ever happened in my career. Is that particular detail is just how cool we all are and
Yeah, I
humble.
totally agree.
Uh, humble in regards to we all know how hard the work is, and so I feel like
Yeah.
because of that, bakers are pretty chill because it's like Um, uh,
Well,
the fact that we get
a
our
few
asses
things.
kicked and baked. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I was gonna say just a few things really stick out in your story there is one, um, how incredibly fortunate you were to have those mentors in your career early on in your career. I mean, from Glenn Mitchell to DDA to whatever, and others, Greg Mistel, and it also kind of it's awesome that now you're in a place. I mean, I think you've been in this place for a long time, but you're giving back through education, and you're here with me today. So that's really just awesome.
It's definitely the way I was taught from the very beginning by my peers is, in the baking business, when I opened my bakery, Steve Sullivan and Acme Bakery opened their doors. Acme or Semi Freddy's, David Rose and Michael those guys own Semi Freddy's, still the same family owned business, opened their doors. Metropolis, which is no longer with us, but the owners I'm still friends with, opened their doors. And I was just a punk, like a 23-year old, like, I'm going to open a bakery. And I had no right to open a bakery, believe me. But they all gave me incredible, like, just so kind to even allow me to walk in and look at their spaces. So from
Yeah,
the beginning of my career, it's always been about giving back because that's how I was shown. From the very beginning, just kindness from day one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like to shift gears and get into something maybe tangible to some of the viewers that about grains. I was looking for somebody to reach out to, so I'd contacted some flour mills, and I was wanting to get somebody on to talk about like grains in America. And you're probably as knowledgeable, if not more knowledgeable, than anybody that I can think of. And just our wheat, our wheat crops, and then most importantly, like the local grain movement that's been happening, and it kind of parallels micro bakeries as well. But there's been a lot of more regional and local farms and millers popping up or trying to, and it must be a terribly difficult business. I don't know a ton about it, but probably different rules and regulations and the government involved. But, so what do you see, as far as, like, what's happening with the local grain movement? It's been coming along pretty well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so I had I had this bakery in Sonoma, Artisan Bakers, and I made some life changing poor business decisions, and really found myself out on the curb, quite frankly. I mean, quite literally. And a gentleman who was at the World Cup when I competed in '96 and kind of always maintained a relationship with me, but I never really understood him, named Joe Vanderleet, a Dutchman, and maybe you got to meet him because you have
I
Dutch
did.
in you, if I remember right. Yeah. So Joe was
Yep.
a hero, quite frankly. Like a real hero. And Joe's story, to make it really brief, is Joe's family is from Holland, and they were in the era of the Nazis. His brothers, at least one of them, had a tattoo on his arm. They were Christians; they weren't Jews, but for whatever reason, they were still. Joe was young enough to be put in a work camp, like a child work camp, anyway, they got over to the United States. He did as a young gentleman, like in his 20s, and found himself in Minnesota and started working in the grain business and ended out raising five children in the incredible American way, and big home, all the dressings. Went to college, all that kind of stuff, and built a significant mill in Alameda, California. I guess probably in the 60s. It was probably built around then. It's still used. And was the guy that built it and ran it, kind of the man in charge. And so he was in California. All of his kids have kind of grown up, and somebody visited his mill that said something to him. They were from Australia or New Zealand, if I remember right, basically saying, how come you guys are taking all the nutrition out of your wheat? And Joe had always had that in the back of his mind growing up from in Holland, but never, like never really stopped to think about it so much because he was so focused. As you probably know, Michael, white flour mills are like an engineering miracle. They're just like mind blowing that they can separate a grain into 20 strains and reblend them, and they're really incredible. But they are really great of stripping basically all nutritional value out of a perfectly healthy vehicle. So anyway, Joe, to try to keep it short, but Joe started his own whole grain mill in San Leandro, California, and this was in his 60s, late 60s. That he's just a super energetic, passionate man, and he was trying to sell me whole grain. His grains were in my products in 96. I used his corn, his whole corn. I used his barley in my beer bread. Um, and I used some of his rye in my rye bread. I had to make five breads or whatever. And his, with DDA's guidance and everything, Joe's grains, ended up being tastier than anybody else's grains we can get our hands on. But nevertheless, I was a white flour baker for 17 years. And it wasn't until I got kicked out on the street that Joe like said, come work for me. Cause he was my friend. I never bought a bag of flour from the guy. Even though, the way I was working, I was getting 10 pallets of white flour and one pallet with lots of different grains on it. And it wasn't enough for me to deal with Joe, like buying 3 bags of whole wheat and 3 bags of rye, whatever. And so anyway, I go work for Joe, and he has this little like home kitchen in his mill up in Woodland, California. And he says, I want you to test bake for me. And so for me, working with whole grain was something like, my mind of whole grain was 30% white flour, and I mean 30% whole wheat and 70% whole white flour. I mean, and that was extreme. Like that's my whole grain.
Yeah.
And so Joe only made whole wheat. So I was bringing in white flour to his little test kitchen and making, I was pushing the limits and doing 30% whole wheat and the rest white flour. And Joe, obviously, he's Dutch, so as you know, Dutch people are great at just getting to the point. And but he was being very kind to me for about a week, and then after that, he's like, "Why are you bringing white flour into my mill?" And I was like, "This dude's paying me like no more white flour as of that day." And I was off white flour from that day for a good 10 years, 11 years, because and my way of thinking was I have incredible skill sets around white flour, but I have shitty skills around whole grain. So just eliminate the white flour and learn how to use this whole grain. And so I dived full on into whole grain with Joe's knowledge, and I became a disciple of Joe Vanderleet. Quite literally, was traveling around universities and places, kind of being his sidekick and lectures and talking about whole grain, and became part of the Bay Area small grain movement. I sat on the board of Community Grains, which is one of the people here that is more like a broker with has farmers grow locally, and then he mills it or has a miller mill it, and then he tries to sell it. And like you said, it is a hard business. And Joe Joe quite literally was trying to talk community grains out of even thinking about going into that business because of the if you're a commodity, if you're in the commodity world, you the margins are so tiny that it's brutal. And to get out of the commodity world takes to get out of the commodity market takes a lot of guts because it's dramatically different to grow local and mill small and have the equipment and all that. A bag of flour costs 5 times as much as a commodity flour. So it makes it a
Right.
it makes it really difficult for a baker to be accepting of that flour because it costs 5 times as
Yeah.
much.
I remember meeting Joe. I think I must have been in the late 2000s, maybe 8. I did a lot of work for King Arthur at the time, so I was a little bit more active in the flower
I
business.
remember now. Mm,
And I remember meeting Joe, and he was talking about a couple things that were unique and maybe eye opening to me was is that he milled actually with the kept the germ in, and he even talked about how if it's milled together, it could be a like a preservative, and he was a champion, I guess, the whole you can leave it in. You don't have to separate it out and reconstitute it or pull it out completely. So that was one thing. And the other thing was particulate size of the grain when the flour was milled, that it was fine but it was very consistent. And so we weren't getting as much, I guess, damage or cutting of the gluten when you used whole grain. You could actually almost make like 100% whole wheat croissant, even if I recall.
for
Um,
sure. Well, your memory is great. Those were two of his biggest things. Was that he milled whole, and he wouldn't temper, no tempering. And I had miracle after miracle, Michael, of things that people that I believed and my peers believed, or milling peers believed, that Joe would prove them wrong. And that in particular was the germ being milled with the wheat berry versus being separated from the wheat berry. So Joe would definitely tell you that if you add water to the wheat berry and then separate it with a white flour mill, that you're killing that wheat berry. You're taking the life out of that wheat berry, and I'm somebody that fully believes that. I'm 100% on board. The A wheat berry that's milled whole versus one that's separated is two different animals, and one's alive and one has been shot mortally and is going downhill quick,
yeah.
so to speak. And this includes fermentation. The activity of fermentation is what I call true whole wheat versus reconstituted whole wheat. Reconstituted whole wheat from large factory mills are ferment very much like white flour, and true whole milled fresh wheat ferments 10 times faster on average than white flour, just because of the life in that wheat. I mean, literally, Mike Sikowski and I, Mike's one of my whole wheat peers, and we joke often that sometimes you just have to breathe on our dough to get it inoculated, because it's so alive already.
I bet. Can we maybe we could give some takeaways to some of the viewers, and I don't have this fully established in my own mind. So we know that we have to age flour, especially white flour, for example. It's different from if you get, especially I see this in bulk flour deliveries, when it's milled one day and it's delivered within a day or two, and it's in that green state, and it performs more um, predictable and it's more stable after a couple weeks. Then, but then there's also the proponent of, just as you mentioned, freshly milled whole grain flour. That is, you're milling it and baking it in the same day, same next, within a couple days. And why? Can you just talk about that? I mean, the aging. I mean, is it stable or not stable, or do you have to age it or don't age it?
Well, I mean, I think I don't know the answer because As you know,
Well, you
this
can
craft
talk
is
about your
incredibly,
experience then.
yeah, it's incredibly humbling craft. So I think, yeah, I was taught, Michael, you and I had very similar upbringing in the baking business. You were just a couple of years behind me, but you had that DNA inside of you that you lapped me quickly just with your born skill sets. But um, for sure, we were taught the the aging thing, and I observed it. With the Bread Bakers Guild, we were lucky enough to travel to mills and learn a lot. And the whole intention of the guild was education and bringing millers and farmers and bakers together. Um, uh, and then I had this Joe experience, and it just rocked my world. And even in the whole grain, like the amount of unknowns is crazy. So to answer your question real quickly, whole grain, I personally, I've done blind testing and definitely do believe that fresh whole milled whole wheat is tastier than a week old or 2 week old milled wheat. But with that said, do I think it's worthwhile doing in your bakery business? I would argue no. because because being a miller is a skill set. It's not turning a switch on to me. And people go to college to be a millers. And Joe definitely had strong feelings, like taught me a lot about just buying the grain. And it's complicated. So um I feel like the fresh milled thing, what I observe is people. Oh, I'm observing this a lot of ways, Michael. I really feel like we had this incredible education spurt, and then this last, COVID period, this micro bakery, um, maybe this last 8 or so years, I'm seeing our education curve going back down. I see a lot of people doing really not logical things in the baking business. So whole grain, fresh whole grain, if you're not dialed in on the fermentation stuff, people are making, no disrespect, but I'm not infatuated with battery acid flavored bread. And
Right,
that's and honestly, it's the easiest thing to do is make battery acid flavored bread. And
right,
so I like to remind people a quote of DDA's, "Where's the word sour in Levain?"
right.
So I find that um, if you think about being a French train or chef, you really think about the palate and matching foods. And having very, very sour bread doesn't go with a lot of different food. It kind of is a narrow passage of food. And so I find that it's very tricky. Fresh milk flour is very tricky because of what you're talking about. Without a doubt, if that flour sits for a little while, it's going to perform better because it oxidizes and things that I also feel like people make mills, as with working with King Arthur at one time. For sure, white flour is a different subject than whole wheat. But even the white flour mills these days, they're delivering flour just about as quickly as they're milling it. It's not sitting around like it used to. And so the idea of fresh milled to me is, for sure, there's parts of the country that there's probably pallets of flour sitting around for many, many months just because of the distribution system. But in general, if you're a bakery of any size, you're getting pretty fresh flour. And I trust the millers more than I trust the guy in my bakery with the switch on the millstone.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
I think most of the aging process is happening in the distribution channels. And so some
Exactly.
people are close to a mill, and if they're in, maybe Southern California or what have you, and they're buying local, they could have bagged flour in a couple days after it was milled. But in other cases, if you're buying from Pendleton, maybe up north, from Idaho or whatever, that it may be the transportation to Central California is a week already, and so they're getting some age on it.
Exactly. Yeah. That to me is I am definitely not. As I say, I have been proven to myself that there's a flavor profile change with fresh milled. but not enough for me to sacrifice my staff in a way for a product that's uh, uh, potentially different all the time. If I'm, the way that I'm baking these days is it's pretty much me, myself, and I, and so I'm fine with that roller coaster because my hands are finely tuned instruments, and so I'm fine with the roller coaster, but it's not a delegatable roller coaster, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, I feel the same way. Sometimes it's fun to have a challenge. Over COVID, I started a micro bakery, and I certainly did a lot of things that I wouldn't advise other people to do to do.
Right. Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
so um, I think that was the most interesting thing about that when I had my own micro bakery up there and I built in my 3-car garage and everything that it was really the first time in my life that I had the skill set, but I also had the need to and desire to make my own bread and decide what does that even look like because I baked for everybody else. If I'm consulting or what have you, and I had to set back and think like, what do I want Michael's bread to be?
Mhm.
So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, and what did it
So,
how would you define that?
well, I certainly wanted more whole grain than I think my consumer wanted.
Right.
So I still baked whole grain for myself and whole grain miche. And I mean, I'm a big fan of 4-pound loaves or 2-kilo loaves and selling them by the half if you can. Um, but that wasn't that popular. But so
Oh,
pretty
no,
much,
it's
yeah,
almost the worst thing you can call your bakery is a whole grain bakery.
exactly. I think gluten free is more popular in that regards.
That's really depressing, but I would agree with you. Yeah, it was definitely, my intentions, been a funny little journey, but as I said, I found my little bakery that I have now, it's 15 years old, and it's just a mile from my bakery or from my house, a little over a mile. And the kitchen's 450 square feet, so it's very tiny. I have an Empire, little tiny deck oven in there. Um, and my intentions were just to learn how to work with whole grain, so I made everything whole grain, and I was so depressed for the first few years because I wasn't selling bread. And I live in Marin County, like everyone's supposed
Right.
to be so woke and enlightened, and that they're at IHOP 2 blocks away, like the parking lot's packed, and the Jack in the Box has a line of cars around it, and there's a donut shop, that's packed, and nobody's at my bakery.
Right.
So, I definitely took me a while to learn how not to say whole grain, and really kind of trick people into saying what the ingredients were, and kind of, I'm making a tomato basil garlic bread or whatever, and not say whole grain, and then they would make it popular. But I certainly am not 100% whole grain anymore. But I don't have any type 55 or type, the lowest ash content I have is a type 70. So
Yeah.
I don't have any real white flour, and I mostly use type 110 as my white flour, so to speak.
Well, you bring
Um,
up your bakery, and I really want to get into that, and I want to kind of blend it in with the overall kind of baking industry. So but let's start with where your first bakery started, and the kind of what I think is baking in America. The DSD, direct store delivery. We're talking, bakeries that are successful end up at 10 or 15,000 square feet. They have a fleet of trucks that are on the road. Baking starts many times the day before. So that's kind of that business model that took over every metropolitan, city in America. I mean, you can pretty much go through each major city and name one of those types of bakeries, and they're still in
for sure.
business today. So I'm certainly not knocking them, but I find that business model so utterly challenging and kind of unique even to America.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, 24/7 is what you're talking about. And Yeah, we started at 1,000 square feet with, myself and my family. My family put up the money, so they were my luggage, so to speak. They were my office staff. Um, and we grew it to, by the time I literally got kicked out of there, I was in 20,000 square feet with 100 people. And we were delivering to, 3 to 400 different accounts a day, 7 days a week. And we had 10 trucks on the road. And um, we were baking bread at noon the day before until 3 in the morning the day of. And the trucks were on the road at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning. And yeah, it was crazy. It wasn't until I stopped doing it that I really realized how crazy it was. It was very stressful. 24/7 really doesn't allow for any opportunity to get your shit together. So you're always kind of dealing with late. When you have 100 people, there's always somebody that isn't having a great day, and that can be tiring. And vehicles breaking down, and all kinds of energy that's spent on everything but baking. And so for me, the model was I learned it from Grace and Semi Freddy's and Acme, and and I rocked and rolled. I really love the production, and making a lot of bread is a lot of fun for me. I really like that part of it. But by the time I was done in that situation, I was not even getting to be, what I am is a baker, and what I feel is, what I was ignoring. I've always been kind of an artistic person, and really I'm an artist is what I am. I'm not a $5 million, $7 million business operator. That I grew into that, but I certainly, um, it's brutal. It took a lot of my soul out of me having that operation.
Yeah,
And
there's in any business, there's a lot on the line, but in that particular business model, and I'm very familiar because Greg's Bakery at Delphina's was pretty much the
mm,
same way. We were 15,000 square feet, and at our peak, it was definitely. I think on Thursday, Friday, it was 27 or 28-hour days.
mm,
Because we were baking past when we started the day before on those busier days with markets and stuff, but
yep,
it felt like every day is there's so much riding on, there was so much on the line from the trucks running to a driver did something break down, did a machine, break down, and you just can't make up the time. And it's
mhm,
a challenging situation. So I guess I just recognize that as, I guess, for what it is. And in return now, the micro bakery movement, I remember working at Delphina's Bakery, and in 2003, I took my vacation time and I drove down to Petaluma and stayed with Alan Scott.
mm,
It's funny, I just called him up. I think I whatever 411 his phone number, and I had his book, The Bread Builders,
yep,
and I just called him and he answered the phone. I was like, wow, this is really odd because I looked at him as a pretty famous guy. He had a book, right?
me too. Oh
And
yeah, he's one of my idols, by the way. Yeah.
yeah, so he's like, well, just come down and you can stay with me and we'll build an oven together. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's wild.
Yeah,
So I did.
yeah,
And I got there at
yeah.
11 o'clock at night, and um, Alan Scott answers the door, but gives me a room, lets me sleep at his house, and takes me to Della Fattoria the next day. And I worked there for a day. And I just remember just absolutely loving that business model coming from a large production bakery that's complex with drivers and everything else, to seeing Della Fattoria in that kind of business model. That really kind of got me super excited.
Mm. Yeah, well,
So,
Alan
yeah.
Alan Scott, my little Alan Scott story is that he had ovens all over the valleys, in wineries or rich people's homes, primarily. And so there would be fundraisers or opportunities where I would be asked to bake at one of his ovens, and my my request would be if Alan would do the fire, I'm more than happy to bake in them. And so I was lucky enough to hang with him, a handful of times. And he used to tell we I was young and, I'm winning those awards and training World Cup teams, and I was really proud of the numbers of loaves I was making, and at the time I was hanging out with Alan, I'd be like, I made 1,000 loaves of bread, yesterday. And those thousands of loaves of bread are all over the Bay Area today, and I'm getting people to think about bread in a good way. And Alan would be like, I make bread 1 day a week and I raise my family, on this 1 day a week thing. And I would call his bread, my bread was aesthetically, I thought at the time, super beautiful. And his looked like a dinosaur turd. His Desm,
It's
his hundred
yeah.
percent whole grain Desm. And so he he would say to me, and I wouldn't even eat his bread. I wasn't even interested in it. And he would say to me how much he loved, like the only bread, the white bread he would eat was my rustic bread that I would make in his oven, which I would just make bread full of water because those ovens were so hot. They would
Yep.
they would work, they would cool down the oven by putting big watery pieces of dough in there, and they would perform magic in that oven. But Alan died, right? Now I guess 15 years ago or whatever. And I always think about, he only knew me as the white flour kind of punk guy, and now
Right.
I'm, baking 1 day a week. Not as small of a production as him, but for 15 years now, I turned into Alan Scott.
Oh, that's such a great story. It's so funny. I remember, like I said, I was working at Delfina's. I was a production manager of that facility, and I was pretty proud of the bread I was making too. So I had ciabatta and the paisano, which was all white. It's a big boule that was white flour and sourdough, and so I packed my bread down to his house when I visited, and I remember his daughter was there the next day at breakfast, and she's like, "Who brought all the white bread?" I touched on the micro bakery, and I don't know if that's what you call your bakery, but the micro bakery movement is like off the charts, and there's a lot of good coming from it, I think, in the industry, but there's also some quirky stuff that you kind of touched on earlier that it's kind of like the shotgun effect in some regards as far as like baking technique. It's like it's now it's all over the board, right? um
Yeah.
so what do you think of that micro bakery movement that has happened? I mean, home bakers are it's off the charts, and people at markets.
I'm kind of a stickler about fundamentals. It's been my whole career is fundamentals and teaching fundamentals. I believe in fundamentals. I really think they give people the freedom to be a great baker. So I find it very, very frustrating. I don't know why. It's no harm on me, but I don't know. I never really, I really, the American palate is, not everybody lives in metropolitan areas. And, most of the country's metropolitan areas has some pretty good bread to be had these days. But,
Right.
uh, uh, I always find that bad product is not good for our business, whoever's making it. So, and I find that the fact that their consumers are telling them how great it is because their consumers are uneducated about what great means. So I find that really a spiral of unfortunateness in a way. And I don't I as I get older, I'm trying to let go of stuff that bothered me, and but that one's a hard one for me to let go of. I think the information's available now. It's not, although I'm a little confused to what the Bread Bakers Guild is up to these days. I'm not involved a lot, so it's not fair for me to be really too critical. But I definitely have seen some poorly written formulas coming out of that place, and teachers that are teaching that I'm not quite sure why they're teaching. And no disrespect to anybody, but I always take pride, or I've taken pride in the guild really bringing the best educators to the table, and teaching in a solid science fundamental baking way. And I still feel in my core that that is a good thing. But in another way, there's authors that have written books that for you and me, Michael, are cringe, make us cringe probably with the information in there. But in another way, they've exposed more people to baking than anything else, and I guess that's a good thing. I'm not a home baker, so I don't really relate to that level of, I find home bakers often more passionate than I am about baking. I'm in love with the craft of doing it right. And right to me is kind of understanding the science and going from
Yeah.
there. So I do find it good in one way. And the amount of micro bakeries, I mean, it blows my mind. And I'm sure, Michael, you have the same thing. The amount of people that actually made a good living doing something else that think they want to open a little bakery uh, is
Right.
is always something that I'm like, you have no idea what you're about to get yourself into. And I've seen over and over again people who are very stubborn and don't listen to me, which is fine. I don't care. But, that really put up a battle for 2 or 3 or 4 years. And then they finally realize this is crazy, and you have
Right.
to be part crazy to be a commercial baker.
Yeah,
It's,
I totally agree. Yeah, it's amazing. You and I are so together on that. I mean, my family here, they like, are you really a baker? Because
mm,
I'm not baking. I don't bake a loaf at a time, and I
right.
don't do that. And that it's bonkers to me to I have no interest in it. I have an interest in the craft. I have an interest in being a professional baker. Um, you know, so and also you touched on some of the books and things that have been written. It's quite crazy how from the what 96, or I'm not sure when like Bread Alone came out, but then the Village Baker, and then by the 2000s we starting to get a handful of books that were written. And I know Jeffrey Hamelman's, I think, was the mid 2000s, which was a good book, I think.
It's an
But there's some
evergreen.
that are completely garbage, I have to say, that
Well,
they don't even follow basic baker's math.
more than some. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, Jeffrey's book is an evergreen, a perfect evergreen baking book. I mean, it's just will never be bad. It's perfectly written. And the San Francisco Baking Institute book, there's books out there that are just perfect, but
right.
the majority of the ones that are written in English, really unfortunate.
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah,
think they you fun for inspirational stuff, like learning about a story of a baker, or, those kind of things for sure are cool. But when it comes to the science, it's either right or don't write it. Like
I agree.
it's not a subjective thing to me. It's not like Michael's way of baking. When you and I talk, and I know this because we have over the years, we understand each other. Bakers that are trained can talk, and just with a pencil and paper and math, we can talk to
Right,
anyone in the world about what we're doing, and we all agree to the logic. It's like it may be something totally different than how I do it, but it would make sense logically. And
right.
that's the part that I just our country just dumbfounds me. I mean,
I totally agree.
the inoculation subject alone is like the most confusing thing to me possible. That because of Team USA and all the training we did, and having DDA's guidance from the get-go, um we know inoculations like the back of our hand because we had to be so accurate and precise that this is going to be ready at this time. And so when you see the majority of sourdough starters out there, or whatever they're calling them, mothers, starters, whatever, that they're feeding 50% seed or 100% seed, and I was just like, I don't get it. This is like, what are you doing? And,
Yeah.
I was starting a consulting project just now. And, they're a grocery store chain and they have a dozen or so bakeries in their stores. And they were set up 25 years ago and then they've been kind of rudderless for a while. And they're doing a pretty good job, actually. Their formulas are pretty balanced. I'm only taking the job because they're doing a pretty good job. It's not a total craziness. And even in their starter that they're feeding, you know, they're um they're using 100% white flour. So, like you can put a pretty abused pre-ferment into white flour and it still functions. You can't do that with whole grain. Like you can't. It's like it's bad. So they're doing one that they're keeping for 48 hours like a sourdough starter and they're feeding it 58% seed. And like that to me is literally 10 times more or, 15
Right.
times more than you need.
Right.
And so we took a piece of it out yesterday, and the one that was fed that morning that was going to be used in 48 hours and it was already spent, you know,
Sure.
like, and it's like, what? I don't understand how this is so, that's my main pet peeve is people over fermenting and so focused on the flavor sour. Like,
Yeah,
that's
that
like,
seems like that one would be ready in like 5 hours.
exactly. Yeah, and I mean, no disrespect to them. They're hiring me to help them, so it's easy for me to dial them back in, and they're really thankful, and they learned a lot yesterday from me just showing them a piece of that mother or whatever they're calling it that can't even capture gas anymore. It's like we're trying to make
Yeah.
things that capture gas. So if your pre-ferment is not capturing gas, it never will capture gas. It ain't going to recover some magical way.
Right. No
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah.
So so tell me about your bakery. Some of the I mean, I've been there, but I find your setup very interesting and if I had something I started a micro bakery. Unfortunately, I don't have it anymore. I moved and all of that stuff. But if I was owning a bakery, I would probably try to gear towards something like you have. It's very interesting. So you're baking one day a week, is that correct?
Yeah, so I definitely Michael, I coach everyone I can to be more like me, and Zakowski, Mike Zakowski and I are like brothers, not necessarily really close, but we're like brothers, we've been in the trenches a lot together
Yep.
and he's doing a very similar kind of thing. I think he's working harder than me a little bit, but he's a one man shop and I'm a one man shop and I tried to make my little bakery something more when I first opened. I had coffees and I had a staff of 4 or 5 people and I was just losing money. It was just because I was selling whole grain, and that was my big mistake. And somewhere along the line I started to realize the more I close, the more money I make. So
Yep.
if I open 3 days, I may make, let's just use a funny number, not an accurate number necessarily, but I'd open 3 days and I would make $3,000, 1,000 each day. And I open one day and I make $3,000, you know? So I was just like, hey, well, I sure would rather just do the one day and make the 3,000 instead of the 3 days and making the 1,000. And without a doubt I've gotten myself in a corner because what I've decided to do when I opened this bakery, because I was really depressed. I lost everything. My whole career, kind of my financial situation, the works was completely kind of taken. I made decisions that caused it, but I felt like I was raped basically. And I was really
Yeah, I
emotionally
remember
kind
that.
yeah, I was in bad shape for quite a few years. And the bakery was my like kind of hideout, like therapy for me. And but I started what I decided, my big bakery, I was delegating everything. And so with Ponsford's place, the intention was for me to do everything. And so as I mentioned, I'm dyslexic, hyper. I'm really a poor writer, and so I started doing these emails to communicate with my customers. And I've always had people my whole life. I've had people proofread and correct my horrible skill sets, and I just sick of it. I really don't like doing that. And so I'm just putting out my email the way that that Craig
Just the way it
Ponsford
comes
puts out
out.
an email. And it turns out to be incredibly popular because it's really a real email. It's not polished, and it's really Craig.
Right.
And it's a craziest thing. I can't even understand it, but people really love that email. And I have 3,600 people on the email list or something like that. And
Wow.
I open I've really I share my bakery. I'm really lucky that I have this woman, Mary Dunham, who is she's 32 or something like that. She's been in there for a year and a half or so, a CIA graduate who worked in the trenches in the Bay Area, and then during COVID did this pop up situation. Anyway, she's been recognized as one of the top bakers in the Bay Area right now, and she's just a one person show. She's herself only, and then I have one of my interns. That I worked for me for, learned everything about baking from me, and then went off and worked for a lot of other bakeries. And now she's back in there and uses it. So um, I don't have to be in there all the time. That's kind of intentional so that I don't have that, I'm trying the rent is kind of shared amongst a bunch of people. And so I'm really trying this year to really only open twice a month. And I do, it's almost all pre-ordered, three-quarters of it. And so I get about 100 orders a week when I open. And it takes me 40 hours of work. And Hannah, since she's currently in my circle, my intern, she does about 16 hours of work for me on top of that. And then I have a lady that helps me in the retail store and a kid that cleans the day that I
Mhm.
bake. And I still put in about 40 hours with all that help. So I sell a lot of stuff. It's a lot. It's pretty awesome that I'm able to. I hardly ever have the same thing on the menu. It's completely creative. I get to do whatever I want. I don't have any wholesale accounts. And it's really about me being an artist. And I don't even see my customers anymore. Which is unfortunate, but it is
Mhm.
how it is. I'm out of there 2 hours before we open because it takes 2 hours for my staff to pack up the orders. And I put in like a 20-hour day and a 26-hour period the day before. I
Right.
just take a nap in between. I have a little 6-hour break or 7-hour break in between, and I do kind of a double bake. So I bake my
Yep.
rye breads and kind of things that can be done earlier in the day, my pan breads and things like that, and then my viennoiserie and my bread and all that get baked at night. So my second round of breads. So
That's
yeah,
fantastic.
it's pretty awesome. I am turning 60 this year, and I've been a laborer all my life, and my body has not been particularly thrilled with what I did to it last year, and especially the holiday period. I
Yeah.
just so I'm really trying to make some adjustments to I really want to be the baker, so I'm not looking to hire a baker, but I'm going to be baking less, just
Yeah.
because my body is not participating as well as it used to.
Yeah, you touched on a couple things that I've always thought myself, and I witnessed myself the couple of years that I was running my micro bakery is like you said, it's instead of trying to do, 3 days a week or more even, which would be worse, but, um, your customer base is gonna buy a certain amount of bread, and if you happen to reduce your bakes, then they're gonna buy more bread, and whether they're gonna freeze it, or whatever they're gonna do, so for the most part, that is kind of the trend that try to get as much as you can out of one day before you ever go to another day.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and that trend is it's good, but I am I'm a production machine, and I'm not taking a break every 2 hours, and I don't eat a lunch, just because that's how I always been. It's not what I think one should be like, but when I show up to work, I literally don't stop until it's done,
right.
and so, that's an unhealthy way of working. But
Yeah, I think
since
we're
I've been doing it my whole life, I have a really hard time not doing it that way. It's really hard for me, because I could choose to open 3 days a week and just sell, a third as much as I do that, the one day. And maybe that would be better. I do kind of ponder, but I really like not working for 7 days.
yeah. So you're teaching also, correct? Or is that still are you still doing that?
Yeah, I had a pretty regular gig up at the Artisan Baking Center at Central Milling, which if
Mhm.
you've seen that facility, it's one of the nicest baking schools. It's VIP. It's just super nice. Um,
Yeah.
they are incredibly kind to me, treat me really well. I could teach every month if I want, but I did take on like a slightly separate gig this year. This consulting gig I was talking about, and I'm going to teach a little bit less this year than I have the last couple of years. So
Yeah.
I'm substituting the consulting. I just need the the teaching's great, but I really take things very seriously, and so
I bet.
I even though I've been teaching now since '96 when I won the competition. I've been teaching since then, and I still feel like this is the class that they're going to figure out that I'm a fraud. so,
Oh, man.
so I torture
I don't
myself.
Are you ever gonna put a book together? Are you
you
gonna
know, I
ever write
had
something?
I had the incredible process of working on a book. Um, I guess it's been a couple years now that we worked with it, and the woman that was helping me is a very well known. She wrote for the New York Times for years, years and years and years, and written some books for like Sherry Yard and Jeffrey Pfeiffer. So she's done quite a few books for peers of ours. So I felt, and we really hit it off, which isn't easy for somebody to write with me because of my skill sets. And so it all seemed great. And the thing that isn't in our favor, even though this woman is incredibly well known, we are not in the world of social media, and because of that, the way that books are being written, in the majority of the cases these days, you have to have a social media presence that's significant. Uh, and so even though she did all this work for me, we literally put a year of work together, and she made this incredible proposal, and it was going to be a kind of a fundamental book that covered white flour, but really went into whole grain also. And
Right.
uh, she we couldn't get it done. So that was kind of
Mm,
the closest that it was ever going to be. I've been working on these inoculation charts, Michael, for probably 7 years now or something that I'm really proud of, and they kind of cover all inoculation possibilities with white and or whole wheat flour, and rye is one of them. Um, in the different pre-ferments like Biga or Polish or whatever, liquid Levain.
yep.
Um, that I would really like to publish. So I might do my own little self-published little thing because they're the people that I've been able to give them to over the last few years, are really young bakers in general.
Mhm.
They change their life. It just makes uh, they're not they're, there's a million ways to inoculate. They're not the Bible, but they're a great tool to help you dial in, what you
Sure.
want to do. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. I wanted to see if you had some advice for, if there's a new baker that's what, like we were 21 years old when I opened my bakery for the first time, and what advice would you give somebody who's starting their career out right now?
Well, I mean, education is so powerful. I can't really understand how bakers, when the information is available, when we started, it wasn't so available. So, like you said, that you mentioned the handful of books that were out there, and literally it was three or four. And the
Right.
guild's newsletter became the Bible, right? Um,
Yep.
in terms of science. So yeah, I would say, taking the time to take the classes at the San Francisco Baking Institute, or Central Milling. The problem with Central Milling is it's not as established, and they don't necessarily have programs that happen from year to year. Where San Francisco does have the Artisan 1, 2, and 3, and they have the viennoiserie programs and the bread programs. Those are so worth your time, man. They just save you hours and hours and hours of frustration. The more you know, the more control you're in. So if you
Right.
don't know your baker's math and your Gantt charts and your techniques, you're just wasting a lot of time.
Yeah,
So
I totally agree. For my education, I had to learn by chasing jobs, to be honest with you. I had to go to places and work for people who knew more than me.
right.
And so in the early to late 90s, that's what I was doing, is running around working for other people that knew more than me. And then ultimately, of course, I landed the job with Greg, and I got a chance to learn a lot from him.
Yeah.
Um, so I think you have to be particular about your education and not
For
get it off
sure.
Facebook or something.
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt, Michael. Yeah, when I say get educated by people that are actually talking bread science and not silliness, because there's a lot of bakeries out there that, they make things that people come and buy, and sometimes may even be a huge popular situation. But you take those bakers out and put them in another bakery, they have no idea what to do because they only know what they've learned in that facility. So
Right.
if you're really trained, then it doesn't matter which bakery you're in, what oven you're using, what mixer it is. You're ready.
Right.
You got those skills. So I agree with you. It is one way to go visit people and learn the way you did, but it's so powerful to get the fundamentals right away, and then when you go visit people, that stuff you're learning is actually makes more sense.
I totally
Mm.
agree.
And,
Absolutely.
and I
Yeah,
would
I
say
wouldn't.
what I would also say watch your podcast, Michael. The amount of information that you're giving people is incredibly kind and powerful. You are sharing stuff in such a solid way, in such good information that I'm just like, to me, I'm so thankful because it's like a bank account of information that I'm like, if I ever do, and I don't think I'm going to, but if I ever do another bakery, um, I'm going to be referring to your information because it's so powerful and generous and time saving because it's really solid information. I don't think
Oh,
there's
thank you.
anything like, literally, there's nothing out there that is sharing the way that you are in regards to, you know, thinking about production and oven sizes and, a lot of very common sense things, but they're not common if you don't know them.
Right.
So you have
Exactly.
to know them first, and you're sharing them in such a common sense kind of way. It's really, really great. I'm really thankful for it.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I think that's just been a wonderful conversation. I wish we wouldn't have waited so many years to get back together and have a good talk. This has been very nice, and I appreciate it so much.
Me too. I really am thankful that we know each other, and Yeah, I mean, when I saw you reach out, I was like, for sure, I haven't got to talk to you in so long. So I'm very thankful and very much looking forward to seeing you here in California soon.